Hello again. In this video, we'll see how Jesus was teaching about his return in our future in the parable of the 10 virgins. He's coming to fetch his bride, the church. This teaching is part of a series on Matthew 24 and 25, the speech Jesus gave on the Mount of Olives, known as the Olivet Discourse. Previously, we saw the disciples had two concerns. First, when is the temple to be destroyed? Second, what is the sign of your coming at the end of the age? I finished his answer to the first concern, and now we are on to the second, which begins in Matthew 24, verse 36. Quick review. What are the signs of the second coming? Jesus gives three quick teachings. First, his return in our future will be like the flood of Noah's day. People were unaware the flood was coming, except for Noah and company, but the timing was unknown even to Noah, and there were no signs preceding the flood. Second, Jesus says his return will be like a thief coming in the middle of the night, unannounced and unexpected by the people in the household. Third, his return will be like servants waiting for their master to return after a long absence, who are all caught off guard by his sudden, unannounced return. However, the faithful servants are doing good and are rewarded, while the wicked are punished. These teachings of Jesus make clear that there are no signs of the second coming. No one knows the day or hour, the time, or the season. As we continue reading into chapter 25, he turns to giving more details of what will happen at his return, rather than just how unexpected it will be. The first passage we come to is the parable of the 10 virgins, which we can treat like a play in 3 acts. Let's read Act 1, which introduces the characters. Then the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. For when the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them, but the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps. Remember, this is given in answer to the disciples' concern about his return at the end of the age. Jesus says, at that time, then, the kingdom of heaven will be like this story. This clues us in that it's a parable. He teaches here that his return will be like the return of a bridegroom according to the customs of the Jews in that day. This is the metaphor Jesus chose to reveal details of his return. So who are the characters in the parable? Well, the returning bridegroom represents Jesus, who is coming back to fetch his bride. Jesus had previously referred to himself as the bridegroom and his disciples as wedding guests. The 10 virgins in the parable represent the church as a whole, all the wedding guests. 10 is a symbolic number in the Bible which represents totality, the complete number of something. In this case, the believers, all God's people. Why are there 5 wise and 5 foolish? Not because 5 is a symbolic number, it's not, and not to indicate that half the Christians are wise and half foolish, because other verses tell us differently. It's to indicate that there are only 2 groups, and every Christian is one or the other, either wise or foolish. But what's up with the oil and the lamps and the meeting the bridegroom? Well, these are all details of the first century culture of the Jews, which we need to know in order to understand this parable. So let's look at their marriage custom in those days. You have a woman who will become the bride and a man who will be the groom. Growing up, the woman lives in her father's house and the man lives in his father's house. When it's time for marriage, the two get together along with their family and witnesses and contract a betrothal. There's a brief ceremony where bride and groom will drink wine from the same cup as a sign of their union. Then the bride returns to her father's house. She is now considered both bride and wife because they're under contract. The husband returns to his father's house if he's the firstborn, like Jesus. Now begins a time called the time of preparation. Typically, this lasted about a year. The bride would prepare a wedding dress and find her 10 virgins, who are like bridesmaids. The groom would prepare a place for the two to live in his father's house, either by constructing a new residence or just adding a wing on his father's house. At the end of this time, so a year later, the groom returns to fetch his bride. This is where the parable of the 10 virgins begins. The groom and his party would come to the bride's father's house, and the bride and her party would meet him out in the street. The two parties would have a procession parading through the town or from town to town, waking up the neighbors to share in their joy. When they all arrive at the prepared place on the groom's father's estate, they would have a wedding feast that lasted 7 days. Then bride and groom would live in the place prepared in his father's house, which becomes their permanent home. This is the picture Jesus gives for his leaving, his absence, and his return. He left 2,000 years ago. He is absent now, but he will return in the future to fetch his bride. He even told his disciples in John 14, I go to prepare a place for you, and I will come again and take you to myself. This is marriage language that a groom could have said to his bride in those days. So what about the lamps? Since the groom returns at night, the virgins need to have their lamps ready. In those days, oil lamps looked like this. It's called a Herodian lamp. You can look it up online and even buy yourself a replica. The lamp has a reservoir for oil, a hole in the top to pour the oil in, and a spout on the right where you place a wick that soaks up the oil to burn and give light. But these lamps are quite shallow and will only burn for about an hour before you need more oil. Here's a first century lamp that the archaeologists dug up, and with it you can see the flask for oil that the wise virgins have. This flask would allow you to refill the oil and keep the lamp burning all night long, which will be needed because the wedding procession could take a while, and the lamps can also be used in the wedding feast. The virgins in our parable have signed up to be wedding guests and to provide this light. In the same way, Christians have signed up to be the bride of Jesus and to shine the light of Christ into a dark and dying world. Jesus told his disciples, "You are the light of the world. No one lights a lamp and hides it under a basket, but puts it on a stand so it will give light to all the household." We Christians are the lampstands who hold up the lamp of Christ, who shines the glory of God into the world. In the book of Revelation, Jesus says the 7 lampstands are the 7 churches, so lampstand is a symbol for the church. Since the virgins are assigned to be lampstands, we know that they represent the church, the body of all believers in Jesus Christ. And wise Christians are prepared to shine their light continuously. All right, on to Act 2, the conflict of the story. As the bridegroom was delayed, they all became drowsy and slept, but at midnight there was a cry, "Here is the bridegroom, come out to meet him." Then all those virgins rose and trimmed their lamps, and the foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." But the wise answered, saying, "Since there will not be enough for us and for you, go rather to the dealers and buy for yourselves." So the bridegroom was delayed, just as our bridegroom Jesus has delayed his return for 2,000 years now. Here, Jesus was telling us it would be a while, and at various times the church has fallen asleep due to the delay. The virgins all fall asleep, but in the middle of the night there is a loud cry, and a voice says, "He has returned. Come out into a meeting with him." This is when the bride's party was to meet the groom in the street by her house. All the virgins wake up and try to ready their lamps, but the foolish ones who have no flasks of oil can't keep their light burning. So they try to get oil from the wise ones who did bring flasks. Now, sometimes a seemingly insignificant detail in the Bible can make a huge difference. Here, the fact that the wise virgins can't share their oil tells us something. The wise virgins know they will need enough oil for the wedding procession, which by itself could take hours, and their lamps can also add to the lighting at the feast. This tells us that they're going on a long journey, because if they only had to meet the groom in the street, then come back into the bride's house, there would be plenty of oil to share. But that's not how the marriage customs of that day worked, and the people he spoke to knew this. That's why the parable doesn't specify where the feast takes place. Everyone then knew it, so parables can be nice and short by leaving out obvious details. In this, though, Jesus makes it clear that he's not coming back here to live with us, but he's coming back to take us away with him, just as a bride goes to live in the house of her husband's father. He also teaches that foolish Christians who wait until his return will not be able to borrow faithfulness and good works from wise Christians to make up for what they didn't do. All right, let's finish up with Act 3, the resolution. And while they were going to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the marriage feast, and the door was shut. Afterward, the other virgins came also, saying, "Lord, Lord, open to us." But he answered, "Truly I say to you, I do not know you. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour." The wise virgins, because they were prepared, go with the wedding procession, doing their duty to provide light as lampstands, and they are admitted to the wedding feast. But the foolish virgins who are off trying to obtain oil at the last minute are unable to join the procession and perform their duty as light bearers, so they are locked out of the wedding feast and left in the outer darkness. This represents the final judgment, which happens when Jesus returns, and people are divided into the righteous and wicked, who each receive their sentence. The wise virgins represent faithful Christians who go to live in the Father's house in heaven, where Jesus has gone to prepare a place for us. The wedding feast is a picture of joy and celebration about this, but also a picture of the final consummation of the relationship between husband and wife when the two become one. The foolish virgins, however, are left out of the feast, abandoned by Jesus in the outer darkness, which represents hell, the eternal destiny of the wicked. And what's truly tragic about the foolish virgins is that they represent faithless Christians. They may be foolish, but they are still virgins. Their failure to shine his light lands them in the same place as unbelievers. And this is where the parable ends, with each group of virgins in their final destiny for eternity. The lesson Jesus emphasizes is, since you do not know when he returns, therefore be ready at all times for his return or for the end of your own life. We are to keep ourselves virgin pure, unstained from the defilements of the world system, which is in rebellion against God. We are to be faithful to one God and one Lord Jesus Christ, just as a virgin bride is faithful to her one groom. And we are to keep our lamps filled with oil so we constantly shine his light into the world. Now, there's so much depth to Jesus' teaching in this parable that I'm going to need a second video to explain it all to you. So the next video in this series will also be about this parable, and we'll look at what else it teaches, such as about the resurrection of the saints. Today, I read you the whole parable and explain what it teaches in broad strokes. But there's one more thing I want to draw out here. This parable also teaches the return of Christ in our future is unannounced and unexpected. Notice that all the virgins are asleep, the foolish and the wise. They are all caught by surprise when the groom returns. This is the same thing Jesus was teaching by saying his return would be like Noah's flood, like a thief in the night, and like the return of the absent master. No one knows the timing, including the wise and faithful Christians. So stop with all the date setting. And again, in the parable, there were no signs of the bridegroom's return. If the foolish virgins had advanced warning, they might have tried to obtain more oil before he arrived. So this parable also teaches there are no signs of the second coming. How many different ways did Jesus say it in these two chapters? Then what should we think of brothers and sisters who say there are signs? Are they likely to be the wise or the foolish virgins? I'll let you decide. And not only does Jesus repeat that we can't know the timing, he repeats the lesson which follows as a result. Wise Christians must be ready at all times for his return. So be wise, brothers and sisters. Stop looking for signs of his return and instead keep shining his light into the world. I pray this video has blessed you. Please tune in for part 2, coming soon to a theater near you. Thanks for watching. God bless you all.